Okay, I am calling to order the Board of Directors. You know what? I think I have the wrong. Sorry. The Board of Directors meeting for January 4th, 2022. Sorry.
Yeah.
And our first item of business is to call the roll.
Director Bragman,
Present.
Director Gibson,
Present.
Director Schmidt,
Present.
Vice President Russell,
Here.
and President Kohler.
I'm here. Now we need to move forward with the adoption of the agenda.
Move approval of our agenda.
Second.
Terry, do we have any comments on adoption of the agenda?
There are none.
Okay, if there's no board comments, then we need a roll call vote.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Schmidt, Vice President Russell,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. Okay, it is now time for public comment on items that are not on the agenda. Terry, do we have any comments?
Yes, Mr. James Krajewski. Mr. Krajewski, please.
Thank you. I want to comment on what I perceive as a problem for the district. The problem is a lack of transparency that is evident in various ways. First, there's a major problem finding coherent information about water use in Marin on the website. Water users should not have to dig through pages and pages of multiple documents to find basic information, such as the use of water by various categories. The water use data need to be aggregated into a section that's easy to find and provides an analysis of the use by various parameters. For example, what is the use by various types of businesses? What's the use by various entities, such as towns, or by categories such as golf courses, single family versus multiple family homes? Definitions need to be provided for each category. The district can enhance transparency by rethinking how it structures its reports and including the meeting agendas also. For example, tonight's agenda in the background totals 121 pages. There are no links between the agenda items and the sections being discussed. Alternating between the agenda and the background report requires endless scrolling. Reports online suffer from similar problems. There are not internal links and documents that allow easy movement between sections and appendices. So trying to find a particular appendix may require scrolling through literally hundreds of pages. When it comes to meetings, transparency is limited by the fact that meetings are not transcribed. There is a lot of important discussion and opinions that are not in the minutes of the board meeting. If anyone wants to find specific information from the meeting, you have to listen to each meeting separately. The district could easily use transcription software or a transcription service to make board meetings more transparent. And the board should not hold meetings without recording them or providing transcripts. Why did the board hold a public meeting or retreat in October that was not streamed, not recorded, and not transcribed? This is a prime example of a lack of transparency. We've all been through a difficult time dealing with the effects of drought. The board needs to engage as many Marin water users as possible in a cooperative effort to find solutions and deal with the effects of drought. Making information transparent and easy to find will help that goal considerably. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're of course not allowed to respond to comments that aren't agendized, but I think it's fair to say that without commenting on all of the speakers' suggestions, the question about providing, some sort of easy to find way of, aggregating data about how our water is used, that's come up a lot. And I don't want to put a burden on the staff because I'm so aware that the drought and the challenges that we've been facing for the last year or so have put a huge burden on staff. But I would like to ask, just for myself, that we do agendize, that issue at some point. I know there's a long list of to-dos that the board has asked the staff that the general manager tracks, but this might be in particular one, not commenting on the rest of what the speaker has raised, but that one in particular has come up a lot. And I believe some of the other board members have expressed interest in doing something similar as well. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you. We have one more speaker, Ed.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, thanks. I'd like to thank and compliment the district staff for its efforts to deal with the drought over the last 8 to 9 months, including the 2 outstanding webinars in October to engage customers. All of staff has appeared to be consistently aligned and pulling together, and I'm guessing that's likely a testament to General Manager Horenstein's leadership. I'd also like to acknowledge Paul Sellier. Since early summer, he's been sitting on a powder keg, but he's been consistently calm, suggesting that everything was under control, as staff was desperately trying to get the problem addressed. And he was providing knowledgeable, concise answers to a wide range of key questions. I hope it'll be many years before you staff folks and we customers have to deal with something like this again. It's this board's responsibility to assure that this kind of a crisis never occurs again. We've all known for a long time that a drought would arrive, but the board had failed to prevent it. And 3 of you directors have effectively sabotaged the pipeline from being financially viable. When the crisis occurred, 2 of you professed paramount concern for, quote, healing the Delta, end quote, countered by Mr. Russell saying we'd be buying water rights from people like rice farmers, water that would otherwise be consumptively used. I think Mr. Russell got it right, and the other 2 of you got it financially, ruinously wrong. I don't know, but perhaps protecting the Delta was the reason for the $100 million pipelines being unbelievably restricted to use only in a declared emergency, perhaps every 8 to 15 or even 30 years. This policy foreclosed our occasionally utilizing the East Bay's Los Vaqueros Reservoir to enhance our grossly inadequate storage here in Marin. And Ms. Kohler, you wouldn't even let the pipeline water be used to keep landscaping alive. And despite your protestations, if we'd used a dribble of Sonoma water or our own reservoir water for landscaping, I believe we'd possibly have risked being in material breach of our agreement with East Bay Mud. And contrary to your reassurances to the other board members, once those foolish MMWD policies were incorporated into East Bay Mud's policies, as they were, future MMDW boards could not change them, as you assured the other board members could be done. And East Bay Mud's policies for our pipeline include that our 191,000 users must subsidize East Bay Mud's 1.4 million customers, including the city of Oakland, through participation in low-income assistance programs or programs for customers who cannot pay their East Bay Mud bills and or other such programs. This pipeline is financially a dead duck with such potentially extortionate demands by East Bay Mud, which brings us back to Marin solving its problems right here at home. The board needs to start acting rationally and responsibly, acting in ways that do not have to have negative consequences for the Delta, for example. The rhetoric needs to be put aside to be replaced by seeking thoughtful solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Do we have any director's announcements this evening?
I just want to echo Ed's statement about our staff and particularly Paul Sellier and what they've done for the last 8 months. I thought what he said was right on, and I'm sure we all feel the same way, but needs to be acknowledged.
Great. Any other director's announcements? Ben, do you have any announcements?
I don't this evening, President Cole.
Okay. That brings us to the consent calendar.
I'll
Any
move
motion?
approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Do we have any public comment on the consent calendar?
There are none.
All right, I need a roll call vote.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Vice President Russell,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. All right, that brings us to the regular calendar. And the first item, I believe, is yours, Ben, organization of the board.
You're on mute.
Item 8. So I don't know, Terry, are you best positioned to walk us through? I can see this. This is electing the president, vice president as the first step. Do we?
That is correct. So first, the board will need to nominate the president. And then after that, then we'll go on to nominate the vice president. We'll switch positions now throughout the remainder of the meeting. And after we do that, we still need to continue with going over approving the board calendar as well as approve the committees.
Okay, are we ready for a nomination?
We are.
Yes.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
let me do this. Who
and
is, who is making the motion
uh,
for the nomination, I should say?
I have I'm biting at the bit to make actually, in the name of efficiency, I want to nominate Larry Russell as president of the board and Monty Schmidt as vice president of the board.
Awesome. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Do we have any further board comment on this exciting item? Okay, do we have any public comment on this item?
There are none.
Great, then we are looking for a roll call vote.
Okay, so Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Schmidt, Director Russell,
Aye.
and Director Kohler.
Aye, awesome. I am now handing over the virtual gavel to new President Russell.
Do we have
Thank you.
musical accompaniment?
Yeah, what about the cake? There's always a cake. And
Mhm.
what about your gavel? We got to get you your gavel. So there's a lot of things to do here.
I'm sure that'll come. The only thing I will say is I think I probably have the distinction of being the only director to preside over an entire year of virtual meetings.
That's undoubtedly true.
Yeah.
Hopefully the last one to do that too.
Hopefully.
Okay,
Okay,
so now
Go
we'll
ahead,
go
Terry.
on to, so now we'll go on to the board committee calendar, or the board meetings and committee meetings for 2022. As you saw in the staff report, it was the calendar for 2022. The meetings are based upon our normal first and third Tuesdays of the month. We will hopefully begin at 7 o'clock, but we also may mention the time at 5:30 so that we can include closed sessions. Furthermore, the calendar was created to also accommodate the conferences as well as the Finance and Administration Committee meeting for the end of the year. And just also, I believe it was my understanding too, that we are going to try, and correct me if I'm wrong, General Manager and General Counsel, we're trying to do our closed sessions, I believe the second board meeting of the month, so that it won't be where I'm always calling you to get your schedule for closed sessions. And that's all I have, unless Molly or Ben want to add anything.
I would just add that we want to acknowledge that the regular start time could be as early as 5:30. We may want to actually make a notation on the calendar if there's no objection to that, just so that we don't have to notice special meetings when we do want to have closed sessions prior to the 7 o'clock start time. As Board Secretary indicated, we are trying to endeavor to schedule closed sessions at the second meeting of the month, but we can't promise that that can happen every single time. Sometimes there is urgency or just a number of items that we need to cover. So that hopefully will add to some predictability, though, for the directors.
So are there any board comments or questions on the calendar?
You need a motion to approve?
Yes.
Okay, motion to approve the calendar for the year?
Second.
Should I ask for any public comment before we do that?
Yes.
Let's do.
And I don't see any hands raised. So just letting you know, that's great. So Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
aye.
Thank you. And then Director Russell, do you want to go ahead and lead the committee's
Sure,
discussion?
sure. Before we do that, I'd just like to say thank you to Cynthia for her hard work and leadership as the president of the board. She had a tough year to deal with in a variety of ways, from the drought to the virtual side to dealing with us. So I just want to give a heartfelt thanks for her hard efforts and and excellent work.
Thanks, Larry.
Tough year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was.
Thanks, you guys.
Okay. So committee wise, pretty much we've had a discussion with various board members, and we're pretty much going to leave things just as they were. It seems to be working well for us. I would like to emphasize that commitment to chair these sessions is an important committees is an important commitment, because you really need to be there to be able to service these. So, keep that in mind in your agreement to do this, that it's a commitment to lead that group and to take over the management of it and push things forward. So with that, I'd also, unless Jack, you want to speak to this issue about attendance of the committees and the outside functions?
No, I have.
Okay. Well, I was about to say is this. We would like the staff to be sure to alert the various board members to outside activities where we attend, varying from the North Bay Watershed Association to the WAC and TAC meetings. We encourage everyone to attend these meetings. I think it's a good thing. There's no issue that we're aware of with the Brown Act, because you're just attending as a visitor from the audience. But it would be helpful, I think, for all of us to get as much information as possible over the next year from these activities.
Yeah, I actually have a proposal that is probably timely, I think, right at this point in the agenda. I would propose and ask staff to come back as soon as possible, maybe the next meeting, with the concept of a newly formed board of directors committee that is to focus on our enhancing our water supply. Looking at what we've talked about in general for months now about possibly extending our partnership with Sonoma, the Intertie, but a specific committee that is designed for that purpose, that would meet periodically to make sure that we keep on track with that and enhance the security of the supply. Specifically with connection to Sonoma and increasing that water, as well as the possibility of the Intertie across the bay. A second proposal, again, for staff to bring back to us, is a new board policy that sets out, I want to call it an emergency policy. Clearly, the emergency of the drought is subsided. But I consider we still have a continuing emergency, and the emergency is that the lesson we've learned from this experience is that the supply is insufficient, and we need to enhance it, whether that's Sonoma, whether that's East Bay. And I think we need a policy that outlines our direction on that and what our mission is and guideline, so that we all have guidelines and can stick to it. Obviously, that's not something that can be decided today, either of these things, because it's not on the agenda. But I'm requesting that staff bring that back to the board for us to consider, knock the corners off of each of those proposals, obviously, and give us some details. But I think you get the sense that what direction I'm pushing in here. Okay.
I think those are great.
Echo, if I could echo that, I really think that that's a great idea, Jack, and it's something that I was thinking about as well, as we've all seen the dramatic shift in our water supply, that we have gone from such an incredible deficit to being near normal, almost having full reservoirs. It's really, the people keep asking this question, is whether the drought is over. And I think, honestly, we need to stop talking about things about whether the drought is here or over. The fact is that climate change has shifted our hydrology in a way such that we are in a perpetual state of drought, or and maybe another way to look at it is that our water supply has changed in the sense that we will have extended increases in frequent dry years, extreme dry years, such that our water supply scenario has shifted where we no longer have the water supply volume or reliability that we once had, and that we really ought to treat the situation as an ongoing emergency until we develop at least 7,000 to 10,000 acre feet of new water that is available in dry years, so that we shoulder up our dry year situation so that we are no longer as vulnerable as we clearly have been in the past number of years.
Right, right. The way I think of the emergency is that it's almost a climate change emergency. We have a little better than a 2-year supply, and with climate change, and that's simply not enough. We're basically operating hand to mouth now in terms of sustainability of the supply.
Yeah, I really agree. I think that's exactly right. I support Jack's recommendation. Don't want to get too far afield of the Brown Act here, but I support Jack's recommendation and everything Monty just said. I think it's right on.
I agree too. And, you know, keep in mind, this is our second round of severe emergency drought issues in 30 years or 40 years. So, you know, we need a plan that will move us forward. And Jack is exactly right. Normal water districts operate with about 4 years of raw water storage. We have 2. So, you know, now it's been extended by our abilities to save water, and that's great. But we need now something that gets us into that 4-year range, one way or another. So whatever
just
that
to be
technique
fair,
may be.
and I'm sure, Larry, that we agree about this. I think we do have those plans. I think this is less about planning, because I think our planning efforts have been actually quite good. It's really more about now shifting to implementation. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, sure. But I lump them together. You know, we need to move forward. That's the key point.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't want to lose the priority.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
agreed.
the planning side is shifting because of climate change. I don't know
Right.
that what we planned. In fact, Ben and I were talking earlier today about starting on the urban water management plan update, the one that we do every 5 years, and basically getting a head start on that as a good technique for guiding us through this. It's a possibility we can talk about. So with that, thank you all.
Could I just make
Go ahead.
one comment?
Of course,
here?
Larry. Of course.
You know, I agree with the emphasis on supply. You know, I do think there's been a pretty good emphasis on it for about the past 12 months. So I don't know if another committee is the way to really approach it. I would say regular quarterly updates would be, you know, a way to put it in front of our face a little more effectively, and to put it in front of the public a little more effectively, rather than sort of sequestering it in another committee. So, I mean, I'm not against adding that committee. I'm just saying, I think given its priority now because of climate change, you know, we should be looking at quarterly reports on supply options, supply option implementation. That should be a regular part of our meeting format, you know, on a quarterly basis.
I agree that we have been on it for the last 8 months, but it hasn't been raining for the last 8 months. So the challenge is to keep everybody focused when there's no longer an immediate emergency.
Yes, yes. And I'm just saying, making it a quarterly, you know, report or quarterly item on our agenda is going to keep it in front of us and in front of the public.
I think you hit on
that honestly, that you know, we have heard from the public that they want more transparency and they want to see a greater degree of focus on this effort. And I think honestly, you know, this is a complex issue, and so there have been a lot of suggestions from the public, which are totally understandable. But I think the public, for us to have public support, they need to understand the pros and cons of different options, the costs of those options for those water supplies. And I just think that we ought to think about whether a committee gives us a more focused and more transparent opportunity to educate the community about these options so that they understand why certain options make greater sense in terms of a reliable water supply under a warming future than other things. So I think it's worthy of asking ourselves, not only how do we keep focus on it, but also how do we make sure that this is educational and transparent for our community.
Yeah, that was a great comment. I think that one thing to think about here, Ben, is there was a resiliency committee, or there is one that exists, and perhaps you can take a look at that and what its charter was to see if we can just revigorate that. And I think the other thing, Larry Bragman just hit on something extremely important, which I had never really thought about before. And that is that I think we need a report out of the committees at a board meeting so that people get a 2-minute, 5-minute summary or a 1 or 2 page summary to be in the board packet to say what was accomplished in the committee, what happened in the committee. I know they can go look at the minutes of the meeting, but bring it together when the people are here as a way of discussing this. I think that would be
that's a great idea.
Yeah, would
I
really
love that
help, I
idea.
think. Okay, so we need to approve the committees.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then we also have public comments too.
Of
I was
course.
just moving approval to get us going.
Okay, thank you. Who seconds?
Second.
Okay, public comment.
Yes, Mimi Willard and then Paul Duder, please. Miss Willard. Go ahead, Miss Willard. Miss Willard. Okay, let me go back to you, Paul Duder.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to suggest that we, first of all, I think the idea of having a committee for water supply would be good. And I would, I'd like to be able to, attend those meetings and listen in. I feel that we lack an overall problem statement that is very specific. I've heard a lot of board directors mention that we have a 2-year supply and we need more than a 2-year supply, but it would be nice to have a specific problem statement that says exactly what the gap is, how many acre feet of water we need to develop in order to, be able to survive, extended droughts in the future.
Cool, thank you.
Miss Willard, are you ready?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, there are 2 comments. One, I believe it was Director Russell noted prior to the discussion of committee members upcoming that that you folks had a discussion with various board members and the consensus was to leave it as is. I would point out to you that this is a violation of the Brown Act, which prohibits serial communications on a particular subject among board members outside of a board meeting. Certainly, if that discussion includes more than includes a majority of the board members, in this case 3. Secondly, I would like to talk about the idea that these committee assignments that you are proposing are basically a farce. You shouldn't bother to have committee assignments because while you continue, despite my repeated requests that you change this, to list on your website these various daytime meetings as committee meetings, check it out yourself, please. They 100% of the time convert to board meetings because pretty much everyone shows up, and the way that you dual notice them under your review of the law allows you to do that. But they're really not committee meetings because they're never really committee meetings. So this is problematic in terms of the notice given that they are committee meetings. It's also daytime board meetings are kind of a transparency issue, even though there is a Zoom recording, because it's people prefer to attend in real time, and it's difficult for the public to do that, and it's difficult for potential board members to do that if they have a full-time job. And I have also noted that sometimes the discussion is pretty broad within these committee meetings, where it feels more like a board meeting in terms of the direction that things wander that maybe aren't explicitly on the agenda, but could be loosely tied to it. Also in those daytime meetings, you get less press coverage and less, as I said, public notice. So I would urge you, please, to consider going back to what is done at pretty much every other agency, which is to have standing committees that have one, probably most likely two board members who go to those. They get briefed on what's happening with staff and interact with them, and then they report back to the board meetings where the public can see and the press sees what's happening as far as things coming up from the committee meetings to the board meetings. Thank you for entertaining my suggestion.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Willard. Be advised that it's staff that contacted each of the board members, not the board members contacting each other. That was how the information was transferred.
We do have one more, Barbara Solomon. Ms. Solomon?
Yes, thank you very much. I want to say, oh my God. Okay, I'm a former city attorney, deputy city attorney for the San Francisco City Attorney's Office, a former research attorney on the California Supreme Court. And I think this is one of the most dysfunctional board meetings I have ever attended. And I totally support the efforts to replace the current directors on the Marin District Water Board. You guys are not doing your jobs. Why don't we have more reservoirs to capture the water? You lucked out because it rained so much. You basically lucked out. You're going to build that thing over the bridge to like increase our water supply. But why haven't you built more reservoirs to capture more water when there is a rainy season? There's no excuse for it. And looking at you all and watching you all, I think, I don't understand how you got elected, but I totally support the efforts to replace the water board. And I will be fighting for your replacement, especially you, Cynthia Kohler. I think you're one of the worst. Now you're in favor of increasing water supply, whereas you didn't used to be. So no, this is really embarrassing. And I don't know what your relationship is to the local people who live here, but local people are not happy with you at all. So thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Solomon. There are no further comments.
Okay, cool. Let's go on to item 9. Oh, actually, we need to approve that, don't we? We had the motion in a second. We need a roll call.
Yes,
Sorry.
I apologize. Yes, Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, item 9.
Okay, good evening. Paul Sellier, Operations Director. We have a short presentation this evening. This item is on the emergency intertie. And tonight we're going to review water supply and our current storage levels and, look at projections to help us set the context for the staff recommendation that follows as part of the next steps in this presentation. So to do that, as I said, current water supply, we'll look at a projection going forward, and then very, very briefly, the intertie, the options for moving the intertie forward, and staff recommendation and next steps. So I think we've all noticed that it's been raining. Good news, the next 2 days, I guess, are going to be dry. So get out there and ride your bikes or take nice long walks, because rain's back on Friday, which is sort of a good news scenario for us. We're at 41 inches of rainfall this day. You can see considerably above average. And it's just a really nice situation for us compared to where we've been in the past 2 years. Corresponding storage levels shown here in the blue line. This evening, at about 6:48, we were at 74,239 acre feet out of a total possible of 79,566. So we're sort of 92%, something like that, of total capacity. The only, I think 5 of 7 reservoirs are spilling at the moment, just Sulahuli and Nicasio. And Nicasio will probably get there before January's over. So again, a nice situation for us, and 120% or so of average. So it really is a remarkable turnaround for us. Looking at our projections.
Paul, I just want to thank you for giving me a much better start of the year than you gave to Cynthia.
If I could take credit for that, I would. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So looking at our storage going forward, the black line, of course, is where we've been. And you can see on this just how dramatic that increase in water supply has been over the past 2 or 3 months or so. Really a vertical takeoff there. The dashed lines, again, we're sort of familiar with these. The orange line representing 25% runoff, 50% and average runoff. And you can see also on the chart, I've put in these triangles, which are the trigger levels that are currently adopted in our code. And you can see that the April trigger levels are at 40,000 acre feet, and the December trigger levels are at 30,000 acre feet. I think the code indicates language that, in the vicinity of 30,000. And as we move out to December of 2022, we really are quite a margin away from any of those trigger levels, and much better off than we were this beginning of even this December. So it's a good news story on water supply. So then as we wrap our minds around that and think about the intertie and the options for moving this project forward, of course, we could continue with the statutory exemption and move forward with a number of purchases and contracts for strengthening the bridge and final design and so on. The other option might be to cancel the project altogether. And I think we've heard from the board this evening that doesn't sound like a favorable option. And option 3 being transitioning this project to a full environmental review. And, again, just summarizing the storage conditions that would help us make that decision. Our water supply is in a very good position. We've got approximately 2 years of water storage in the reservoirs if it stopped raining. Lake Sonoma's in good shape. Mendocino's in good shape. Our reservoirs, as I said, will be spilling hopefully by the end of January. And it really is a good water supply situation for us. And so our staff recommendation is to adopt a resolution directing the general manager to engage, to engage in an environmental review process pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act for the Emergency Intertie Project, rather than continuing to rely on a statutory exemption. And I would note here that had we not had that remarkable turnaround in weather and storage, our wettest October in 100 years, right? And December was really kind to us as well. Our staff recommendation would have been quite different. And I think we would have been recommending that we proceed with the project under the statutory exemption. But this turnaround in the supply and weather really has afforded us the opportunity to make this recommendation for the board. And should the board accept that recommendation, our next steps would be a detailed outreach plan for the Intertie project that would include, water agency partners, regulatory and government partners, stakeholders, and of course, developing a revised project schedule. And that concludes my presentation this evening.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions from the board?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the one thing we need to be super clear about is that, of course, we've been operating within CEQA this whole time. Wouldn't you say, Paul? I mean, the entire reason we were operating under the emergency exemption is because that is specifically and expressly established by CEQA.
Correct, yes.
So what we're really doing now, if I'm fully appreciating what staff is recommending, is continuing to operate within the legal requirements of CEQA, given the change in circumstances.
Correct.
I think that's very well said, Board Member Kohler.
Well, I think the recommendation makes a lot of sense, and I certainly support the staff recommendation.
As do I. Circumstances have changed, and we have to adapt our management to reflect those changes. So in spite of our supply situation, we're not out of the woods on long-term supply, and I actually think shifting to a full CEQA will make for a better decision ultimately. It'll lay out our project alternatives, and it may help us lay out our operating principles, which frankly, were somewhat rushed by the emergency that we were in when we made those decisions. So, I think we're going to end up in a better place, and I also support this decision, and for a project of this magnitude, I just think it's the way to go.
I'll just weigh in and concur with all the comments that other board members have expressed. I think, in particular in our earlier comments, that we really do need to identify what our climate resilient water supply strategy is. We've invested a significant amount of time and energy in exploring this option, which has not been without a lot of challenges and problems and hardly a perfect situation. So having more time to explore alternatives is a good thing, and it's by the grace of the incredible rainfall, unprecedented practically rainfall that we've gotten. But I think until we have secured or identified and have a clear line of sight on what our water supply reliability solution is in a climate future, we need to keep this one on the table until we know that we can take it off, because we have a better alternative that meets our needs into the future.
Yeah. And if I could just go back to Jack's suggestion, I am in full support of whatever mechanism the board wants to adopt to keep this on the front burner. So, I think a committee like this probably would meet quarterly, and, it would provide a focus for the public and the board. So I just want to clarify, I'm not poo-pooing the idea. I mean, given what we've been going through, what we've gone through, anything that helps keep the focus sharpened going forward, I support. And, again, we're not done with this. That's one thing I think we all recognize. Our climate just is not as dependable, reliable, or predictable. So, we've got to make some plans to accommodate for that uncertain future.
As the financial folks put it, past performance, no guarantee of future.
Yeah,
that's exactly the situation we're in. All we have is the past data, and we really don't know where it takes us. I've been thinking, Jack, about the committee. Perhaps one of the first tasks it could take on, if it's formed, is to manage the EIR that we're talking about here. Might be somebody to think about. I would like to see this thing move along a little quicker than EIR seem to move along, a little more directed. Monthly meetings would be a good start. Usually these things just lie and have their life of their own,
right?
Showing up before us every so often. Instead, if we had deadlines and periodic events, It might make the whole thing easier to manage and definitely more transparent
Right,
for the public.
right.
Any other thoughts?
Well, we need public opinion, of course.
Of course.
Mhm.
We have one public comment.
Okay.
Paul Duder. Mr. Duder?
Yeah,
Yes, sir?
I'm a little bit surprised that there's not really any mention that the
Oops. Go ahead. I apologize, Mr. Duder.
I'm surprised that nobody is mentioning that the intertie was always a suboptimal solution. The only thing that really the intertie had for it was kind of the only project that was going to be able to deliver water in a short period of time, like 9 months. We were going to run out of water in 9 months. It was really the only thing that we had. Now that we have more supply, I think we need to, revisit the idea that the intertie really is a suboptimal solution, and I don't want to put it, I don't want to cancel it because, we can't cancel anything. We need to pursue everything in parallel, but we need to go back and look at some of the other options to provide supply within Marin. In my mind, the intertie was simply a pipeline to other water districts that were actually more active in, coming up with supply solutions, because we were unable to come up with our own supply solutions. So I think that what we should do is go back and see if we can't, develop our own supply solutions. And I don't want to put the intertie on cancel. I wouldn't say that, but at the same time, we need to actually revisit some of the projects that we decided we wouldn't deliver water within the time frame that we needed.
That's a good comment, but recognize that the pipeline is also a connection to reservoirs located outside of Marin. So the key point here is to increase the available storage and the sustainable yield from those sources. That's the key issue. Where they physically lie is far less important than having them available.
Okay.
I agree with Director Russell's comments. I think the other thing perhaps to suggest to Mr. Duder, and maybe this is a longer conversation that we should connect you with staff for, but the benefit of continuing with this project in a full EIR, or however the staff determines it wants to move forward outside of the CEQA's emergency exemption, is that it's the reason that it's part of a large Bay Area regional resilience plan. It's really the last intertie. Ben, you can correct me on this, in that plan. I believe that's correct. Isn't that right?
That's correct. It's the last intertie connecting the Central Bay agencies. That's
right.
Correct.
The reason for those interties is because they provide this much higher level of resilience, right? It's not every drought affects every area of the state the same way. So for example, it's not so much that we'd be buying water from water districts necessarily. That's an option. But, last month I was invited on a tour, really a fascinating tour of rice fields, for example. Rice farmers have become very interested in being involved in long-term, fairly complicated, I don't want to get into it all, but fairly complicated options arrangements, which, may or may not be, a possibility for us. But it's moving into this next phase of the CEQA review gives us an opportunity to examine those kinds of relationships. So I'm not sure that Mr. Duder has completely captured the options that are available to us, to the district, I should say, from, that may be available as a result of completing that Bay Area regional resilience intertie project.
One of the benefits that the environmental review will give us is a good look at alternatives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's worth the effort all by itself.
Right.
And keep in mind that the definition of engineering that I was raised on is doing the most for the least. And it's kind of like that old saying that you can get it good, fast, or cheap, pick any two. It's very hard to do better than that. And the EIR will give us an opportunity to properly study the alternatives. And fortunately, nature gave us the time to do that.
Right. Which is a tremendous gift.
Absolutely. One of a kind.
Yeah, it is.
We have 3 more public comments.
Okay.
Larry Minikes, Mimi Willard, then Ed. Mr. Minikes.
Thank you. Good evening, folks. I just want to agree with Director Gibson and President Russell on the idea of taking this up a step, staying on top of the EIR process, the CEQA process, and meeting on a regular basis. And that may answer much of the transparency questions. That is, if people will attend, because it is obviously going to be a very complex process you're going to go through. And on that, it'll also give you a chance to look at other options other than the pipeline. So all in all, good comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ms. Willard.
Yes, my head is spinning right now. Suddenly I'm hearing now that the pipeline is for the moment tabled, or let's say seriously postponed. I didn't mean to say tabled. The board saying in effect, well, this is really important for us because it is our key tie to the outside world. It provides water security and resilience for us. This is the same board that your last board meeting was fighting in the intertie, and over the course of the fall, particularly led by Director Kohler, was steadily coming up with more and more restrictions that would be placed on the use of that intertie, and that were ultimately mirrored by even greater restrictions, adoption of those same restrictions, and further encumbered with additional restrictions. I think you've now got a real mess to deal with if you expect that this intertie will in fact be a reliable way to get the amount of water that you are going to be able, that you may potentially need to have come over the Richmond Bridge if we have a year like last year, sequentially 2 or 3 times. So I don't know how you're going to dig your way out of this, but I think you are correct that the intertie should be a vital part of the future portfolio. And I think we've got a lot of work to do to undo the damage that's been done over the last several months.
Thank you, Ms. Willard.
Just to correct the record here, we have not put any restrictions in place. East Bay Mud came to us with a number of principles and that they felt were important. And we had, there seems to be a lot of misinformation about this that I don't know that we can correct at this meeting, but I think it's important to be clear that, at least from my perspective, the characterizations that have been made here tonight are incorrect.
Ed?
Hi, I've just got 3 very quick comments here. First, this is again on the intertie difficulties we're facing at this point. We adopted policies in this board back around November 16th or thereabouts. My recollection is those were adopted by the East Bay Mud board on December 14th, just before you had your meeting. I think we were the genesis for these very strong restrictions, like only in an emergency shall we use this thing. Yes, that's what was said.
No,
and,
you're incorrect. I'm sorry.
You've been incorrect about other things, like whether I misunderstood certain restrictions and I didn't. And you're not supposed to argue with me either.
You're right. I apologize.
Yeah. But we have established these policies that restricted us from using it as an ongoing tool to manage our supplies, like Los Vaqueros. And beyond that, I spoke to the potentially extortionate suggestions of East Bay Mud. They had their board meetings in October and November and expressed disgust with our lack of planning and how our emergency became their quick problem to solve for our benefit. They were disgusted with us over there. And they put in these policies to, I think, extort from us unreasonable demands. And lastly, I guess that's it. I've lost track of my final things here. But, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Ed.
Ed.
We have one more, James Krajewski. Mr. Krajewski.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I do think that the board at the November meeting really dug itself into a mud hole that has dried out considerably, because ended up being talk that the water from the pipeline could only be used for health and safety, or only for indoor, or possibly it could be used for landscaping, but maybe not. And I came away from that meeting understanding that the pipeline would only be used for health and safety or for indoor use, which means that it could not be used over the year to fill our reservoirs or to do other things. And so essentially it became just a last escape from the drought, but it was of no practical value in some of the things that are being talked about today, which would be as a resource to fill our reservoirs and so forth. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
I'd like to, if I could briefly, there is a lot of misunderstanding with the principles. East Bay Mud drafted the principles first. What we had talked about it conceptually, but East Bay Mud drafted the principles first and they adopted their principles. We had one board discussion. There was no decision on our board what the principles would be, what constraints would be on the project. And then finally, I want to say, I'm in discussion with East Bay Mud on a routine basis. And the nature of the principles that were developed, I believe, came from the urgent nature of the project, and everything was happening very, very fast. There was the issue with Richmond. I am absolutely convinced that moving this project forward, we will be able to work at a slower pace with East Bay Mud and develop a concept that works much better than the optics of that, quick developed set of principles and the discussion we had as well.
And if I may add, I think it's an important clarification. The project description that was developed and proposed under the statutory emergency exemption was to address an emergency situation, necessarily so, under the circumstances at the time. And as we move forward, we will be able to differently define the scope of the project if that's the interest of the board.
And I have Mr. Roger Roberts. Go ahead, Mr. Roberts.
Yes, you can hear me, I presume.
Yes.
Loud and clear.
The EIR that will be done under CEQA for the Intertie project is an interesting problem, especially since you want to present some alternatives. And I'd be very interested to hear what the board feels the alternatives would be to that project under CEQA. Because you need to go beyond just having the CEQA review of the project proposed, but also what are potential alternatives, because that is normally part of the process. So I would encourage you to have an early meeting that Jack Gibson suggested earlier tonight on what other options there might be that would be put into the EIR process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roger.
President Russell, Ed would like to make one more comment. I don't know if we have time.
Okay.
Okay, Ed?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, thanks. I was totally unaware that you had any input from East Bay Mud in the development of these policies. I'm really surprised at that. So I owe Ms. Kohler an apology, and I'm doing that now. I'm sorry. The fact that those policies included the restriction for indoor use only, or health and safety, is stunning to me. I don't know why they would care about that. So that is a real shock, but that's all I have to say. And thank you for letting me back in, Mr. Russell. And things are moving along more quickly now. Thank you for that too.
Thank you.
I just want to express my appreciation for that, Ed. Thank you.
There are no further comments.
Okay.
we need to take action here. So I need a motion.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye. Okay, item 10. Sorry, I've been moving my board packet around. Item 10, which is about the drought restrictions.
Good evening, Board of Directors. I'll be presenting that one. Let me pull up my screen. Okay. Okay. Good evening, Board of Directors. Lucy Croy, Water Quality Manager. Tonight we've prepared a brief presentation reviewing all of the board actions over the last year in response to the drought, as well as a discussion on moving ahead. So we'll start off first with looking back over the last year and all the actions that were taken by the board, and then move into a discussion on approaches for consideration by the board, looking ahead given the change in water supply, and end with a recommendation and next steps. So looking back over the last 2 years, we've had really two very dry successive years. And moving into the second year, the board took progressive actions in response to the drought, starting first with voluntary conservation, a call to action in February of last year, 2021. And that progressed just a little bit longer into the spring. We were hoping for a miracle March that never came. And unfortunately, reservoir levels dropped and then moved into declaring a water shortage emergency in April. And all along, as reservoir levels dropped, that's how the progressive drought actions were declared and adopted by the board. So moving all the way down through September and late October, when the limits on water use restrictions and penalties were adopted, as well as prohibiting any irrigation through the winter months. In addition, there were a number of operational and water supply initiatives that the board adopted. So approving the rental generator for Sulhuli to move that water into our main reservoirs for use, as well as filing for the first time in the district's history a TUCP for Lagunitas Creek that was approved. And then on top of that, really in tandem to all of these board actions in response to the drought, coming up with a number of new and enhanced initiatives for our customers during the drought in order to achieve both short-term and long-term water savings for our customers and for the district in the long term. So looking back a little bit more detailed on what those board actions were over the last year, starting first in February with the call to action for voluntary conservation, and then moving into the water shortage emergency that occurred on April 20th, including a district-wide goal of conserving 40% over the coming year, as well as mandatory conservation. And then as we moved into summer months, recognizing that a lot of our water savings could be through irrigation, put in place irrigation restrictions, so limiting to 2 days per week, and then ratcheting down to 1 day per week starting in July. And then in late July, Ordinance 453 was adopted. That is the ordinance that restricts landscape restrictions for new connections. So prohibiting any installation of new plantings. And then at the end of the fall, the two ordinances that were approved limited excess use and penalties for any water used above that for single family customers, as well as Ordinance 455, which prohibited irrigation during the winter months, so through May, as well as prohibiting refilling of pools. So in addition to those drought actions, as I mentioned, the temporary urgency change petition that was filed in early September and then approved October 29th. That was the first one that's been filed by the district and was initially for 180 days. But going into October, we've received quite a bit of rain since that point. So over the last 3 months, we've received, as Paul mentioned, I think 41 inches, which has triggered now normal year flow requirements. So starting off the new year, moving into 2022, just a few days ago, we'll be releasing normal year flow releases from Kent Lake, which is actually currently spilling just as a couple days ago. So a small update there. So given these changes in our water supply conditions that have really improved since these drought-related actions were taken, we're now looking ahead at how to shift given where our water supply is sitting. So today, the state took an approach to the drought that is adopting emergency regulations to prevent wasteful water uses during the current drought that will last over the next year. So it's a one-year emergency regulation, similar to what was put in place in 2013, 2014. And staff is reviewing these draft emergency regulations to confirm that all the prohibitions are already included in a lot of our normal year conservation programs. So what's on the books in any year, not just a drought, but any given year. And primarily what those are is making sure that there's a nozzle on a hose when it's used. So an example like that. And it looks like there may be some nuances, but for the most part, everything that is included in that emergency regulation is covered for the most part in our normal year conservation program. So looking ahead for the district, we've put together a few approaches for consideration. Looking back at the drought-related actions that were adopted over the last year, given, dropping reservoir levels and now where we sit with much higher storage. So one option on the table would be to maintain the drought-related actions that have been adopted over this last year until the end of the winter months, so until May, at which point we could take a look at where we sit and go from there and decide if it's needed to roll back. Another option is to progressively step back the drought-related actions similar to how they were put in place. So starting with late January, such as the next board meeting, repeal the limits on water use penalties. So the ordinance that was put in place most recently, or the most restrictive that we've put in place, and step back from there. So February, March, April, repeal the prohibition on irrigation during winter, as well as refilling of pools. And then the third option that we've put together and that staff is recommending at this point is a return to normal year conservation requirements. And this option we've put together would look like at the next board meeting, repealing the drought emergency that was declared, as well as all the recent drought-related water use restrictions and penalties that were put in place over the last year. In addition, recognizing that there has been a large benefit from many of the incentive programs that were put together over the last year, we would do a review of these programs and look at what should stay in place and how to go from there. And then, third is really continuing our long-term conservation efforts and really pursuing different policy initiatives such as the non-functional turf initiative that's underway and will be talked about in another item. So next steps are to return and develop a resolution or an ordinance supporting direction and approach based on the feedback from the board tonight. And then, recognizing that there is a lot that has occurred over the last year, review and revise our water shortage contingency plan based on the lessons learned from this drought and our response. And then thirdly, of course, continue to monitor and report to the board on water supply conditions and ongoing resiliency efforts. And at that point, that is the end of my presentation. Let's see, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you for the update, Lucy. I had a question. It's my understanding the state instituted the $500 a day fines today.
They passed the draft emergency regulations today, and it still needs to go through. Molly can jump in. We were reviewing it today.
Administrative Law Office will review it, and it should be effective the middle of the month. And yes, it does include those additional penalties for violations.
Yeah, I think that's important per our discussion in December about where we are today. That's interesting to hear. So we need to get that summary as soon as you can to us to see where we're going.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm having a little,
I think
we're at the end of the line for the internet here where I live. So we get the pick of what's left is what gets to us.
Okay, so summary on the emergency regulations that were the draft that was passed today.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, I think obviously board comment on what you propose. I think at this point, I really appreciate the work, Lucy, that you put together and other staff put together to provide us these different options. I mean, I think that, I'm leaning toward the third option because I think, when it comes to things like refilling pools, if we are spilling it at 5 of our 7 reservoirs, frankly, I'd rather have pools fill now rather than filling later. So, if we're going to, in a way that's putting water in storage, small way. But I also think if we're talking about landscaping, it's better to have plants go in now in the winter so that they can become established. And our storage outlook, it does not warrant, I think at this point now, restrictions on those things, because that's what our storage is, and I don't want to have our restrictions be based on anything other than data and our water supply. So I think given the current circumstances, I think your third option makes a lot of sense, except for I would not repeal that I think I would maybe repeal our current board emergency, but replace it with what we talked about earlier this evening of a different resolution that declares, and whether this is a modification to an existing one or the creation of a new one, something that indicates that we are not saying that we are actually out of an emergency. We do have an ongoing emergency. Our current water supply situation allows loosening or rolling back restrictions, but it does not take us out of that sense of urgency and need to address the situation that we now understand better than ever that we are in.
I would take a very cautious approach to rolling back restrictions, and I would do it on a case-by-case basis. I think repealing them or rolling them back uniformly is kind of sending a bit of a false message of confidence. Our district is unique. We run out before other districts and we fill up quicker than other districts do because of our supply, because of our surface reservoirs. And I want to agree with you, Monty, on coming up with some kind of a statement that addresses our insecure water situation, maybe come back from an emergency to some other type of description of where we're at. But I'm real cautious about rolling back everything. I mean, I think we should be rolling back penalties, perhaps on high use and pool filling and a few of the other things. But I think we really need to incorporate some of the conservation restrictions into our ongoing operations. I mean, Marin, has always prided itself on being an environmental leader. And nowadays, being an environmental leader is recognizing climate change and climate disruption. And I would be very cautious. I favor actually the second tier of looking at things selectively and proceeding that way, not just rolling everything back 100%. So
I'd like to be clear. I agree that that in terms of our conservation restrictions and incentives, I think those need to stay in place, in the sense that those are things that I think we will want and need and be thankful for doing on into the future. But I think that in terms of the penalties at this point, those seem they seem unwarranted given the dramatic change in our situation.
Yeah.
So I would, maybe it's a mixture of option 2 and 3 is what I'm advocating for.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at. I think we need to take a pretty careful case by case look, and I think we can do it at the next meeting and just kind of go through it as a body and just decide what stays and what can go.
Absolutely. We're in a stage of measure twice, cut once.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of it, and I'm thinking of it not so much in terms of conservation, but rather no water wasted. And I think to look at it that way under the circumstances is a little more healthy. I'm also a little worried that if we don't do it right, we lose credibility with our ratepayers.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we have to adjust. I think we have to adapt. I'm just saying, I think it needs to be done carefully and selectively. So I think that's.
So I just wanted to note that what item 3 is, we would be prepared at the next board meeting to come with an ordinance or set of ordinances. That there's a fair amount of work that's going to go into doing this. So I just want to get a little clarity from the board on what you'd like to see. I think I'm hearing consensus, I think, on pulling back the penalties, the allocations and penalties for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not yet sure on some of the others. We have a prohibition on irrigation. It's what we have a drought emergency that's built into our code. So I'm almost there understanding what the board would like, and I think we can do it. But I think if there's any specifics on what the board would not want to repeal, right? Assuming, we will have very high levels in storage. I mean, I appreciate it feels very quick, the recommendation to do it. And that's based upon really where we are in storage, with the understanding that we're going to keep moving on long-term conservation, on resiliency efforts. But are we in the drought emergency that, caused those actions successively to be taken? I mean, we just the rains came so quick, they weren't slow, which would be a more natural unwinding. So I'm just interested in a little more, are there things on that list that, you would want to keep, like the emergency, like the prohibition on irrigation. There was some discussion on new development plantings with a thought, let's go ahead while the soil's good and have planting versus maybe having new plantings go on in April or May or something like that. So
Ben, perhaps a solution to this. I think it's going to be difficult to get the information you're looking for tonight. Perhaps a more consistent approach would be to have staff pull together what they think they heard tonight and have a discussion on the 14th at the doc meeting prior to the 18th to kind of lay out the alternatives, you know, and kind of put things in conjunction and see where we are, see what kind of, what reaction from the board and what you don't get reaction from the board. Because I think there's so many things. I mean, not the least of which is we got to stay in compliance with what the state is requiring. I hear you talk about taking back the penalties, but the state's looking at putting the penalties on. So we got to make sure that we operate within the you know, as much as we can.
How about this? What if we did this? What if we come with a very clean ordinance that pulls back the allocations and penalty? Well, why don't I just take your recommendation?
Yeah.
We'll have a further discussion at ops. I think
a further discussion is a really good idea. I mean, I think one thing that's important is that we don't want to send the message to the public that, you know, we're just going back to normal. I mean, I think we've built a lot of momentum over the last 9-10 months. And I think it is important to impress upon our ratepayers, who really are our partners in all of this, that there is, you know, and Larry Russell, I think, has been great about making this point. The past is not prologue, right? So I think what we don't want to do is say, we're all good. We're going back to, you know, the way we used to do things in the 70s or the 60s, right? I think it needs to be a more gradual shift, as opposed to just saying we're all good, everything's fine. Because, you know, we could have nothing but dry months going forward, which, you know, given the storage situation, it doesn't necessarily mean there'll be an issue for us in the next year or possibly 2 years, but then there's always the third year and the fourth year. So I think we've done, and I think the staff gets a lot of credit for this, we've done a great job of working with our community, working with our public to help them understand that we are in a new situation in light of climate change. So I think to roll back that work and undo that work by suggesting we're all good, you know, we're going back to the 50s or 60s or 70s. I don't think that's helpful, right? I think a more progressive, a more gradual approach that makes clear that we are in, you know, and I think this is something, Larry, that you say all the time, actually, both of you, Larrys, the past is not prologue. We're in a new situation. And I think we need to build on that and continue to help our public appreciate that we're not going back to the way it used to be, because the climate isn't going back to the way it used to be.
I think all those are great points, Cynthia, and I think that those are messages, are points that we ought to have in a board resolution that, again, whether it's a new resolution regarding our new situation, or not a new situation, the situation we now know we are in and that we are committing to by resolution to addressing.
Cool. Okay. We got a clear, well, how about comment from the public?
Yes, we have several. Larry Minikes, then Mimi Willard. Mr. Minikes. Go ahead, Mr. Minikes. Okay, let's go on to Mimi Willard, please. Ms. Willard. Okay, Andrew McCullough.
Yes, this is Andrew McCullough. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for letting me speak. My strong feeling is that the board should follow staff's recommendation, and I don't quite understand the rationale as articulated by several of the board members this evening for taking this on a case-by-case or a go-slow basis. I don't think the signal that's going to be sent is one that we're back to normal and everything's fine. I think rather that ordinances 449 and forward should be rescinded. And if there are new ordinances that should be put in place, they should be done so in a thoughtful fashion that reflects the fact that we have normal supplies of water at this point in time. We all know, no one here is stupid. We all appreciate that the climate is variable and that we could run into months that are dry months. And if that happens, then this board would have to take action that responds to that. But with a 2-year supply, if we keep in place restrictions that are punitive, I mean, for example, we can't wash our cars right now. That may sound like a small thing, but to tell people you can't wash your cars, or that you're going to be paying penalty rates, or that you're facing other penalties in the event that you water something on your property, it's a real breach of faith, given what they're seeing falling out of the sky. So I think this is the time for a reset. All of the ordinances should be rescinded, and whatever new ordinances are appropriate, that should be what is focused on after January 18th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Minikis?
Good evening. Look, the elephant in the room is landscaping, pure and simple. This is what we're talking about. And option 3 actually is trying to address that. And it was bullet point 3, and I wrote it down. It says continue long-term conservation efforts. And you may want to update that to increase long-term conservation efforts. It's pretty much what you're talking about here. You know, it's dealing with where our real problem is. And our real problem is we have a 2-year supply when what we really should have is a 4-year supply. So if you can put this into a resolution, that the real long-term problem is even when our reservoirs are full, people are going to say, look, the reservoirs are full, they're overflowing. Why are you telling us we have any kind of restriction whatsoever? So it has to be put in terms that the public will understand that even when we're 100%, that's only 2 years. It's not enough. And so that we do have to take action tied to climate change so that the public understands we are going to have to make changes here in the way we do this. I meant to do this a little earlier. I'd also like to address some earlier comments from the public, personal attacks. I want to say to those people in the public, if you can't come here with something positive to say, or at least constructive criticism, you should hold it back. I didn't think what was said, particularly towards Cynthia Kohler, was deserved in any way, shape, or form. And I'm sorry to hear that happen here. It just shouldn't be going on. Thank you so much this evening.
Thank you. Ms. Willard, are you able to speak now? Okay, I'll try to get back to you. James Krajewski, then Roger Roberts. Mr. Krajewski.
You can hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to add that I think when you withdraw some of these restrictions, pull back on them, what you need to think about is credibility with the public. So someone mentioned car washing. I mean, realistically, how much water is used for car washing? I don't think it's probably a whole lot. You can discourage that kind of thing, but should you have these absolute prohibitions on things? And also, at some time of the year, most years, and probably this year, our reservoirs are full and they're running over. So we're losing all of that water. Why not encourage, as part of this program, encourage people to do high intensity water use things during the period of time when our reservoirs are overflowing? For example, encourage people to refill pools if they have to refill them at that time of year, or encourage people to power wash their house if they're going to have it painted or something or other, so that you develop this credibility with the public that you're not just willy-nilly micromanaging things, which is what comes across sometimes. For example, last spring, one of the first restrictions that people wanted to put in place was to stop not refilling pools, but topping off pools. Well, pools, I don't know what the total acreage of pools in Marin is, although I have looked for it on the website and can't find it, but it can't be very much. So you permitted grass and turf to be watered, which uses far more water in the same acreage as pools. So you have to think of all of these things as credible. Are they credible messages to the public? Because you want the public to buy in on this. And so each thing should be backed up with data or with some reasoning that the public can accept. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Miss Willard, are you able to join us now?
Yes, can you hear me now? I hope.
Yes.
Okay. This discussion, which has been quite robust and has included quite a diversity of strong opinion among the members of the public, I think reinforces my previous comment earlier in this meeting that it's really important that the daytime committee meetings not be kind of, unexpected by the public board meetings, or at a time when the public is less able to tune in. So I think this particular discussion about the rollback of drought restrictions really needs to happen next at the next board meeting and not the district operations committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roger Roberts, then Paul Duder. Mr. Roberts.
Yes, it's important that you have a consistent message, and I'm echoing other comments, that we still have to deal with long-term financial planning, long-term water supply planning, and that so that means that you should be very selective in terms of what you roll back and reinforce, if you will, at every step of the way that these things are still needed in terms of the long-term water supply issues that you face. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. And then Mr. Duder.
Yeah, I think that some of the graphs that are in the presentation and some of the rhetoric is a little bit misleading. When our reservoirs are full, we're still only at 50% of the supply that we need. When we have graphs that indicate that when the reservoirs are full, we're at 100%, that gives the public the wrong impression. And it would, I imagine having a graph that starts at 100% of the supply that we actually need and showing that we're only at 50%, because that would help explain why some of these conservation or these drought proposals are still required, because we're still only at 50%. And I do think that it would be fine to fill up swimming pools, et cetera, because that's just another way of getting storage, which we lack. And if we have a proposal that allows people to fill their swimming pools, we should have explicit rhetoric that addresses the reason why, because we're short on supply, and it's another way of kind of gaining some supply. I think it's important to be clear on some of this communication so that people actually understand the situation that we have and why we're doing the things that we're doing and why we have the proposals that we do. Lastly, I think it's a good idea. I think that we should definitely tell everybody to fill up their hot tubs. I think that would be very positive. Everybody would like that. So I think that's a good idea.
Thank you. There are no further comments.
Okay, thank you very much. All righty. Number 11, formation of a Citizens Advisory Committee.
Good evening, directors. Crystal Yesman, Director of Engineering. Carrie Pollard, our Water Efficiency Manager, is on a much rewarded vacation at the moment, given the rain. So I'm going to take this item tonight. Back in November, at a Communications Conservation or Water Efficiency Committee meeting, the board directed staff to convene a Citizens Advisory Committee to work with district staff to review water use efficiency initiatives. Specifically, we'd be looking at the definitions of non-functional turf and what could be limited in terms of turf and grass, water use goals, and district conservation incentive programs. So tonight, I'm presenting to you a couple of alternatives for how to organize the committee and the composition of the committee. One option is to solicit for applicants throughout our service area and attempt to get a membership that's composed of various interest groups, such as commercial landscape business representation, a member from maybe an HOA or a larger community development, multifamily housing, somebody from local government, maybe the building community, because these discussions would involve new developments and restrictions on new developments. And then 6 members, and a majority of the membership being residential, and that staff would select from the applicants and convene the committee. Now, another option that came up during our discussions internally that we'd like to have you discuss tonight is doing the same thing, soliciting for applications, but we would separate them into service areas, into your districts, and allow the board members to choose 2 to 3 of the Citizens Advisory Committee members from each of your districts. And then we would essentially get to the same end goal with a majority of residential homeowners representations on the committee. And with that, we'd also like to see if there's any further discussion from the board as to the topics that we would discuss during the meetings. The procedure, the logistics surrounding the committee would be to convene with the help of a facilitator to come up with a charter and the schedule. We would meet over a 6-month period, 2 hours at a time in the evenings, once a month. And then at the end, the facilitator would assist the group in preparing a report of recommendations that would come back to the general manager and the board of directors sometime in the late fall of 2022. So with that, is there any board questions or suggestions regarding the committee?
I think the idea of it is a good one. I think having it spread district-wide is also a good one. I just want to make sure that we also include affordable housing, people in that affordable housing space. I know I've had conversations with folks concerned about the nexus between affordable housing, the needs for that in Marin County, and the issues that have been raised over the last year or so around growth and how, in new housing and how that affects demand. So I think it's important that there's some representation from that. I guess what I'm suggesting, Crystal, is a hybrid of the 2 approaches that you're outlining, or at least I think what you're outlining, which is, so I think there should be opportunities for particular constituencies to be represented, as well as kind of a diversity from across the district. I don't know that I feel one way or another about whether there needs to be majority of residential homeowners. I think that I can sort of see a debate on that both ways, but I do think it's important to have not only a representation in terms of the geographic diversity in the district, but also the diversity of interests, which I think you've, suggested are significant.
Yeah, based on lessons learned from the convening of the e-bike advisory committee that we had, it would be beneficial that in the solicitation that we have people self-identify, which interest group reflects their interests, and they could check more than one.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important. Yeah. People are not one unidimensional, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And then we could still give you the applicants for your district, though, and then you could select 2 to 3 from each.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Public comment?
There are none.
Okay.
So on this item, just for our understanding, based on the comments I've heard so far, staff would put out a solicitation where interested folks would indicate what district they're in, their interests, and then we would share that with the board member from the district and get the composition of the committee. Is that generally?
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds right.
You know, and I also think it's important where you put the solicitations. I mean, how you aim them, whatever particular groups you're going to be soliciting, you know, to address Director Kohler's comment about getting a diversity of voices involved in the process, I think is very important, you know. So there, we do have, you know, there's renters and there's homeowners, you know, there's multifamily folks, you know, as well as landscapers, contractors, and you know, folks that have a vested interest in certain aspects of the community. So, but I do think just aiming our solicitation at a variety of different cohorts is very important to get a diverse group.
Yeah, I just would agree. I mean, we want to make sure that the people who have a stake in this hear about this and have a chance to participate, you know. And so I think as these different affected, you know, and interest groups are reached out to, we should keep track of that so that we have a good sense of how the notices have gone out to business districts. And, you know, I can imagine that basically the city and the county as well would have interests in these things. We just want to make sure that we really do bring together a broad perspectives so that we can garner support, get input, and be transparent.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with the notion that we have a body that represents all of the various interests, but I think it should be heavy on residential, because I think what we do with conservation is most impactful, much more impactful on residents than it is on commercial businesses. So I think we want both in there, but at least for the ideas. But I think for the, you know, where the pain is felt is on the residential side.
Well, where the pain and the benefits, right? Most of our most of our rebates, the vast majority of the funds that the ratepayers, you know, the ratepayer funds that we've provided are for the benefit of residences.
Yeah.
Yeah, and most of our customers are residences,
right.
So it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Okay, ready to move on?
One other comment, maybe
Yes, sir.
Maybe solicit some students, some young people, if they're interested, you know.
Good one.
What size of committee are we thinking about?
Well, I think you probably wouldn't want to go, you know, above 12, 15-ish, something like that, just for it to be, you know, productive.
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds right. I also think that what might be useful would be to, you know, before we really get too far down the road, is to do sort of a an analysis of how we all, you know, of how the staff and the board felt that the e-bike group worked out. I mean, I think there were things about that advisory committee that worked well. I think there were things that did not work well. And I think we should make an effort to learn those lessons and, you know, and ensure that we are doing, you know, nothing's going to be perfect, but to ensure that we are incorporating what we learned from that experience, because it was very significant. We put an enormous amount of staff and, you know, consultant resources into that. So I think it would be, you know, I guess my recommendation to my fellow board members is that we, you know, take the time to hear from staff and maybe some of the outside consultants that we engaged about, you know, what are the lessons learned from that experience that we can apply going forward.
That's good. Okay, ready to move on now. Let's go to item 12.
Thanks. This is another engineering item, and we have Jake Miller here tonight to present to the board.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hi, Jake.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jake Miller, Associate Engineer in the Design Section, and I'm here to present Amendment Number 1 to the Professional Services Agreement MA 5963 with Woodard & Curran for the engineering services for the final design of the Pine Mountain Tunnel Tanks Replacement Project. In support of the Water System Master Plan, staff and consultant Woodard & Curran have determined the storage capacity and reliability needs to replace the Pine Mountain Tunnel, which supplies 44,000 district customers, or 23% of the district service area. On July 6th, 2021, the board awarded Professional Services Agreement MA 5963 to Woodard & Curran for the preliminary design of the replacement tanks. The preliminary design report prepared by Woodard & Curran proposes two new 2 million gallon pre-stressed concrete storage tanks located near drainage culvert number 5 on Concrete Pipe Road. The tank's functional design will be to continuously buffer the system demands and have the ability to be taken out of service without impacting the Fairfax transmission line and Concrete Pipe Road. This preliminary design was used to prepare the draft and final ISM&D along with the MMRP that was adopted by the board on December 14th. With the preliminary design complete and the adoption of the final ISM&D, the next step in the Pine Mountain Tanks Replacement Project is the final design, including developing final plans, specifications, and construction cost estimates for bidding. Woodard & Curran provided a final proposal for final design for a not to exceed amount of $546,673 and final design completion date in April of 2022. The completion of the final design of the project will assist the district with obtaining funding from Department of Water Resources Urban and Multi-Benefit Drought Relief Grant Program. As discussed at the July 6th, 2021 board meeting, the district reserved the option to continue working with the selected consultant for the preliminary design phase of the project to provide the services required to develop final plans, specifications, and construction cost estimates for the preferred Pine Mountain Tunnel Tanks Replacement Project. For these reasons, district staff recommends the board authorize the general manager to execute amendment number 1 to the Professional Services Agreement number 5963 with Woodard & Curran for the final design package and bidding support services of the Pine Mountain Tunnel Tanks Replacement Project in the amount of $546,673 with a staff requested contingency of $54,000 for a total not to exceed amount of $600,673. Any questions?
Yeah, I got a couple. The next time you're going to bring something like this to us, please distribute the preliminary design report before we have an event like this on a board meeting, because it's very difficult to even look at what the quality of the work is because we haven't seen anything. So the first thing I remember on this report is since July is tonight. So kind of keep that in mind. It makes it easier for us to move forward.
Absolutely.
With that, any other comments from the board? I don't think so. Any public comment? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Good.
There are no public comments.
Okay. Well, I need a motion to move forward here.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Item 13.
Hello again. So this is the future meeting schedule and agenda items. Our ops meeting or our doc meeting will be January 14th at 9:30 in the morning. This is in lieu of the Lagunitas TAC that's going to be meeting on Friday, the 21st. Then after our operations committee meeting on the 14th, we'll have our second regular board meeting of the month. Actually, that we'll have several closed session items. We are planning to have that meeting at 5:30. So I hope that you're all, all are able to be there at 5:30 for all of the closed session items. I'll send out a reminder and try to get your input to make sure confirmation that you're able to attend that. And then lastly, for the month, we'll have our Finance and Administration Committee meeting on the 27th, also at 9:30.
So
Any questions? Oh, go
the
ahead.
5:30 meeting, Terry, is on the 18th.
Yes, sir.
No, yeah, the 18th, yes.
Yes, on the 18th.
Thanks.
Okay, let's move on to item 15. So we need to adjourn this meeting, Molly, and start the new one, or is it just roll it forward?
Yes, that is correct, President Russell. We should adjourn the regular board meeting and then convene the financing authority.
Well, it's me, I don't have a gavel, so I'm just gonna have to
And then an air
make it
gavel.
look like I have a gavel,
Air
yes.
gavel it.
Okay, so let's adjourn the board meeting tonight and open the board meeting of the Financing Authority.
And
I
with
need
the
a-
roll call.
Okay, roll call's fine. We're all here, so that's fine.
Okay, Director Bragman,
Here.
Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Kohler,
Here.
Director Schmidt,
Here.
and Director Russell.
Here. Okay, I need a motion to approve the adoption of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and Director Russell.
Aye. Any public comments on this?
There are none.
Okay, well, with
Oh, I
that,
apologize. Oh, sorry. I saw Mr. Roberts' hand was raised, but then he retracted it. I apologize. Go
okay,
ahead.
okay, then let's move on to item 16.
I think it's 20, Larry.
We do actually have
Oh,
item,
no, I'm wrong. I'm wrong. Never mind. Sorry.
which is
Okay,
a
16
resolution
is-
establishing, sorry about that.
Regular meetings of the Financial Authority. Okay, who's gonna pick this up? Is it you, Ben, or is Chuck here?
You're on mute,
Me,
Chuck.
Chuck.
Sorry?
My apologies. Yeah, I'll take that one, President Russell. Yeah, so item 16 is to establish regular meetings of the Financing Authority for 2022. There's a resolution attached, which we were looking for approval and adoption of. Essentially, what this does is gives us regular meetings in conjunction with the board meetings through April, so that if we decide to go forward with issuing bonds, we have a regular meeting at which we can do so. And that's the purpose of this item.
Okay. So any public comment?
Mr. Roberts, Mr. Roger Roberts.
I don't know where this comment that I am going to make fits, but this is as good a place as any.
Okay.
There are financial aspects to everything that's been on the agenda in tonight's discussion. It's my belief and observation that the water district is a high fixed cost business operation. And I suspect that the water district is presently operating at its below break-even point. And that's due primarily probably to reduced water sales that arose from the drought and conservation measures and so on over the past year or so. So if you're below your break-even point, you need to have a strategy for getting above your break-even point. And You also need to have a strategy for restoration of your reserves that you've drawn down in order to meet cash flow problems. And I would urge you in this organization of the financial arm of the district to look very closely at restoring those reserves as part of a bond issue, as well as incorporating some of the more urgent capital replacement projects that are not currently financed. And like I said, I'm not quite sure where this comment fits, but I wanted to make the comment, and this is as good a place as any. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
Can I ask Larry before we move on? I think Roger raises an interesting point. I just want to, because this is an agendized item and we can discuss comments. I think his point about and replenishing reserves is strong, but I think I think I'd like to hear from Chuck and or Ben about his concern, his fundamental concern about the break-even point. So I just don't want to move on, skip past that, because it does strike me as a very important issue.
Well, I would start, and then Chuck, you can clarify. We have benefited during this drought from the reserves that the board has established and built up over the years. I don't think we're currently in a negative position, but that's due to the reserves. So I do think whether it's a bond issuance or maybe more likely as part of our next COSA and rate setting, that it's prudent for us to have a discussion on replenishing the reserves at that point.
Yeah, I would agree with Ben on that. And, as the board knows too, we do have policy levels for reserves and for our rate stabilization fund, which we have substantially depleted during this, but that's by design. And for our undesignated fund, which we think of as the reserve. So those are things that go into our thinking when we are setting rates.
Does it look like the state's going to fund this past due water bill monies?
It does. We actually just received funding for that in excess of $2 million.
Oh, well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
And perhaps, Ben, we should think about shoving that straight into the reserves as opposed to putting in the general fund.
That goes back to individual ratepayers.
Oh,
yeah.
And they have to pay us then?
Correct.
How does that happen? We pay them and then they pay us?
Yeah, I think we actually will credit them individually to their accounts. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
that's okay, but we still get the money. We still get the money.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think we have a chance to capture it now, and let's think about doing that. I think Roger's comment is a good one. Perhaps we could get a discussion of this at the next finance meeting.
Yeah, I think so. I think that'd be a good place for it. Roger, we don't want to impose on you, but if we could find a way to make sure that you, you're available for that time, because I think that you're raising a really important issue.
Agreed. It's scheduled for the 27th, I believe, 27th at 9:30. Okay, any other comments?
There are none.
I need a motion to approve the resolution.
Oh, I apologize. Paul Duder would like to make a comment now.
Okay.
Mr. Duder.
Hi. Yeah, I was wondering about whether or not, if we went forward with some of the conservation programs and we were able to save a significant amount of water, if we would be running deficits and we would need to raise rates. I think that when we are communicating about conservation programs to the public, that we should be transparent about the rate increases that will be needed in order, if those things actually come to fruition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's a good comment. I think we want to be consistent though, and I know Carrie's not here, so maybe Crystal, you can speak to this. Generally, conservation expenditures are going to be substantially less than expenditures on augmenting new supplies. For example, Sonoma and the bridge pipeline, all of which are on the table and all of which I think we have a consensus on the board we need to be pursuing. But can you speak to that, Crystal? Or
I don't think
Glenn?
that was his point, Cynthia. His point was, as I understood it, that we encourage people to use less water, they're going to pay less water bills. That's what I heard him say. Are we incorporating that in our long-term planning? That's what I heard him say.
Well, I think any water supply strategy, whether it's conservation or water supply augmentation, is going to cost money, right? It's all supply and it's all going to cost.
Of course.
So the question is, which is the least expensive? And generally, my understanding is from Carrie and others across the industry is that demand reduction is going to, in almost all cases, be substantially less expensive. So I certainly agree with the comment that we need to be, transparent and open about what things cost, but we also need to be consistent, right? It's not as though these water supply augmentation projects are free or cheap. So we need to be clear that all of these options have expenses attached to them.
Cool. Okay. With that, I need a motion to approve the resolution.
Move approval.
Second.
I need roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye. Okay, item 17.
Okay, this is an informational item for financial update for the calendar year that we just exited. So the district has essentially three major bond issues outstanding. The first one was the water revenue bonds issued in May 2012 for $85 million. We paid $5.6 million in principal and interest in those bonds this year. The balance is down to $74.5 million. These are the bonds that we forward refunded, and those will get taken out in April for some substantial savings, about $500,000 per year. So those will be defeased in April. The next bond that we have is the bond issued in 2016. These were refunding bonds in the amount of $31.4 million. We paid $1.48 million in the past calendar year just in interest. So the outstanding balance remains at $31.4 million. And then the last major bond that we have to report on is the 2017 bonds that we issued in the amount of $36.1 million. That was used for capital projects. We paid $2.3 million in debt service in calendar year 2021. And we have outstanding principal of $33.5 million on that. And that is the report for the Finance Authority for calendar year 2021.
We're on mute.
I see. That will make better. What I was asking is any comments from the board?
Would it be feasible, Chuck, to get a list of the capital projects that these bonds actually paid for at some point?
Yeah, absolutely, Director.
I mean, it just be an item of interest for me just to kind of track our expenses.
Yeah, I'm sure we can prepare something like that for you.
Thank you.
And what's our total indebtedness right now, Chuck?
Total indebtedness about $148 million.
Okay. Any other comments from the board? Comments from the public?
There are none.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 18.
So for this item, we'll adjourn the financing authority.
Can we hold on one moment?
Sure.
Sorry, Molly and President Russell. I have an item 14 that was officers. Do we need to do anything with that, or?
Yeah, we need to deal with that.
Okay.
It's an informational item, but we should probably cover it.
Yeah, it is an informational item, so I'll go through this very quickly. Just under the Finance Authority's bylaws, we have to recognize and inform the public and the board of directors regarding officers of the authority. Specifically, we're talking about the president, the vice president, the executive director, secretary, and treasurer of the authority. So the president will be the president of the Marin Municipal Water District. The vice president of the authority will be the vice president of the district. Executive director is the general manager. The secretary is the secretary of the district, and the treasurer is the finance director for the district. And that is
Cool.
my report on that.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I skipped that one.
No worries.
Okay, now we're on 18. This,
And
we need
now
to
President,
adjourn, you said, Molly.
correct. President Russell will adjourn the Financing Authority Board and will convene the Financing Corporation Board.
Okay, well, you said it. I agree with it. Let's do it. Okay, I'm now opening the Financing Corporation Board meeting. It looks like you're still up, Chuck.
Okay, should just take item 18 here. So this is
18,
officers also. So the acting president of the board of directors of the district will be the president of the corporation. The acting vice president of the board of directors will be the vice president of the corporation. The general manager of the district will be the executive director of the corporation. And the acting finance director of the district shall be the treasurer of the corporation. The acting secretary of the district shall be the secretary of the corporation. And that is my report on that.
Okay. Any comments from the public?
There are none.
Okay, item 19. This is an approval item. We need to approve the minutes of the January 5, 2021 meeting.
I'll move approval of the minutes.
Second.
Roll call.
Dr. Bragman,
Aye.
Dr. Gibson,
Aye.
Dr. Kohler,
Okay.
Dr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye. Okay, item 20. That's our last one, guys.
And it will be
Financial
very-
update. Okay.
It'll be very succinct. We have no activities for 2021.
Makes those meeting minutes short too. That's good and very transparent.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. And any public comment?
There are none.
Okay, thank you all for hanging in, and we're done.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you. See you.